Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. In this webinar, we'll be exploring a critical topic for the cable and wire manufacturing industry: demand-driven material requirements planning, or DDMRP, and how it is transforming modern supply chains. Before we dive into the core presentation, let me quickly introduce who we are. We are Hype Software Studio, a London-based company with over 20 years of experience in the manufacturing sector, with deep expertise in the cable and wire industry. This background gives us a strong advantage in designing precise, industry-specific digital solutions. Today, we'll discuss the challenges facing traditional MRP systems, especially in the context of the cable and wire industry, where volatility, uncertainty, and global disruptions have exposed the limitations of conventional planning. We'll highlight how DDMRP provides a more responsive and resilient alternative. You'll gain insights into its core components and how it directly addresses key pain points in this industry. We'll also introduce you to Cable S4, our specialized platform designed to help manufacturers like you overcome MRP constraints with intelligent, demand-driven logic. Our approach focuses on business processes and operational KPIs, not just system modules, giving you a holistic, scalable framework to improve performance across the supply chain. At Hype, we believe software should empower people and foster collaboration, ultimately driving long-term success. We are proud to be a DDI-compliant company, with strategic partnerships with SAP, Microsoft, AWS, and Adobe. Now, let's begin the presentation. I'm pleased to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Keshav, Vice President of Supply Chain and Business Process, who brings decades of experience in the cable and wire industry and will guide you through today's session.
Good afternoon, good evening from whichever part of the world you are joining us for this webinar. Thank you, Hitesh. So I believe Hitesh has just given an introduction of who we are, and I'm going to take you through the entire process of what's the MRP all about, what is the traditional MRP, the limitations of the traditional MRP, what's the VUCA world all about, what are the challenges in this VUCA world, and how DDMRP and Cable S4 Solutions, IBS Solutions can help you to navigate through these challenges. So before we go into more details, let's try and understand what are the challenges that we are currently facing in the wire and cable industry and what does the VUCA world looks like. Now, for many of you who do not understand what is VUCA, VUCA is an acronym that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So this is a kind of a current environment that we are in the year 2025. So what are the key challenges that industries are facing, especially in the wire and cable industries? Number one is the raw material cost. Now, of course, a staggering 70 to 80% of the cable cost is attributed to the raw materials, and any fluctuation in the cost of raw materials can definitely impact the bottom line of any organizations, be it non-ferrous metals or polymer or petroleum derivatives, which are used in all the XLP, FeBC, and other polymers that are being used in the manufacturing. The second is the supply chain disruptions. Now, let's suppose you are able to manage the costs these costs are further amplified if they are specifically imported, and there are supply chain uncertainties, shipping, logistics, government regulation, duties, and their timely availability as well. And the third is this: even if you have all of these things in mind, and if you all have these materials in place, a third constraint that comes in is a shelf life of these, specifically the polymer derivatives. They have their own shelf lives, and if they are not consumed within that shelf life period, there is a very high possibility that the quality of the product and its performance starts deteriorating, which will have an impact on the cable. So before we go on, let's look at what has been the evolution of the material requirement planning. It was started way back in 1970, and it's even today the backbone of many manufacturing business processes. What does it try to do? It tries to align the customer's demand to supply process and trying to help the customer satisfaction. But if you were to look at 1970s, when the MRP was just introduced, which is that we call it as the traditional MRP, and the scenarios of today, there are a lot of changes that has happened in these 5 decades. So let's talk about 4 or 5 major areas. One is the complexity. Second is the customer tolerance. Third is the lead time. Fourth is the product life cycle. Fifth is the product variety. Sixth is the forecast accuracy. And seventh is the inventory turns. Now in the 70s, the complexity was very low. Customer tolerances were very long lead time for the parts. Product life cycle was very long. Product variety was very less. Forecast accuracy was very high and inventory turns were very low. In 2025, things are exactly the opposite. And that's why we call ourselves to be in a VUCA world. So if you look at the summary here, is a forecast accuracy that has a big impact. Slow response to change is one of the other big impact of the traditional MRP, leading to static inventory levels and huge amount of data that is being generated from your MRP systems. Now, despite these challenges, most of the ERPs encompass within themselves the traditional MRPs. And these MRPs are not adapted to the dynamic changes in the current VUCA world. And they are unable to remain agile and resilient in today's environment. So what happens when you have this traditional MRP? There is kind of no safety stock, or the safety stock is very fixed for a period of time and it has to be manually changed. The min-max levels use the historical data and it's not a real-time data. The stock levels may not match the future demands. What may be the reality of the past may not be a prediction of the future. Inventory resets are done very rarely. In a best run companies, you can see that the inventory levels are reset, let's say once in a month or at best once in a quarter. But most of the companies, once they set up these inventory and safety stock levels, they do not reset it for even 6 months up to 12 months. And all these non-changes or static environment of the traditional MRP leads to struggles when there is a sudden change in the demand and generating too many volumes of data, making the decision-making process a lot more harder and tougher. So why do we need to change now? Volatility is constant and it's even more volatile in the wire and cable industry. So therefore, it is important to have a flexible and a demand-driven approach to material planning. And it's in today's environment, it's just not optional. It is essential. It's becoming the requirement, and it's extremely important for the operational success and for an increased ROI. So what are the limitations of the traditional MRP processes? The traditional MRP relies on the static safety stocks levels, as I mentioned before, and it has to be manually updated, and it leads to a lot of inefficiencies. There is a historical data dependencies on the historical data, and these data, if not updated, can lead to inaccurate prediction of the future demand. And thirdly, it does not adapt to the current agile environments that the businesses are operating in today. So what happens as a result of this inefficiencies? The businesses lack the agility and the profitability declines. So the webinar is also going to explore how Cable S4 IBS Solutions, that is integrated business solutions, will transform your traditional MRP into a more enhanced material requirement planning coupled with a demand-driven approach. So we will also examine during this webinar how we can navigate through this VUCA world and maximize the company's ROI. So this step is going to take you across into how are we going to achieve it. Now, MRP is not just only for production planning. There are other methods that can be used alone or in conjunction with the MRP, depending upon the nature and the goals of the production systems. So here is where we are going to not talk about revolution. We're talking about re-evolution of the traditional MRP into a more demand-driven MRP process. So as I said, there are a lot of other processes that has evolved over a period of time, which in conjunction with MRP can help to improve your efficiency of your material requirement process. Just in time. It's a method that estimates eliminates the waste and improves quality. Lean production focuses on creating value. Kanban uses visual signals. Theory of constraints identifies and manages the bottlenecks or constraints. So when you start using your MRP in combination with one or more of these elements, it starts building up a foundation, and it starts giving you, and it gave a birth to a new type of formal planning, which we called as the demand-driven planning. So you see the demand-driven planning essentially is it's a platform, but it is built on a solid foundation of the traditional MRP, plus the concepts of lean, theory of constraints, Six Sigma, and the innovation as well. Now, a little bit about DDMRP. Demand-driven material requirement planning was founded in 2011 by Carol Tack and Chad Smith, who are the co-authors of Oakley's Material Requirement Planning, the third edition. And they have founded this institute called Demand-Driven Institute. So this Demand-Driven Institute is a company, is an organization that promotes the philosophy of demand-driven operations. It not only covers demand-driven material requirement planning, but also covers demand-driven operating models and also adaptive sales and operations requirement planning, SNOP process as well. Okay. Moving forward, understand why is it required and what benefits is it going to give to the business. Okay. The demand-driven material requirement planning focuses on the flow. It's a flow-based planning, and it's directly related to the first law of supply chain, where we're talking about protecting and promoting the flow of materials and information that helps the businesses to focus the return on their investments. There is a buffer management, and inventory buffers are automatically adjusted, and there are adjustment factors that you can build into the system so that your original data or your original system does not get tampered with the changes that is happening in the future. The result of this flow-based planning and the buffer management is a planning approach that is more agile and it is more resilient to the changes that are happening in the external environment with the signals that are coming in from the customers. So there are two types of signals that come across: the demand signal distortion and the supply continuity variability. So these are the two variable signals that comes from the customers and from the suppliers. And DDMRP is essentially a solution that helps you to mitigate the risks of coming from these two processes. To understand the DDMRP in more detail, let's understand what are the 5 components of the DDMRP. The first one is called the strategic positioning, then the buffer profiles, dynamic adjustments, demand-driven planning, and the visible collaboration. Now put together these 5 cross steps or the components of the DDMRP has been translated into 3 major steps, 3 major processes, as we call it: position, protect, and pull. Now, the 3 P's effectively work together to ensure that the process works exactly as per the demand signals and make sure that you are able to give an adequate responses to the supplier's requirements to make sure ultimately that the inventory is within your control. Okay, we'll go in each of these components in detail in the coming slides. Right. So the first one is the strategic positioning. What do you mean by strategic inventory positioning? Now, along your entire supply chain, right from your procurement up to your manufacturing or your end of manufacturing, there are several processes that happens. There is the manufacturing, there's the sub-assemblies that are created, and there are packaging and other processes. Now, the whole idea of demand-driven planning is to create a decoupling points. Now, what is decoupling? Now, decoupling is essentially a point that creates an independence between the supply and the use of materials. And it's a location in the product structure where the inventory needs to be placed so that it creates a independence. And the amount of inventory that you place there is called the decoupling inventory. Now, the ideal scenario is that the closer the decoupling points are towards the sales order visibility horizon, the better is your response to your customer's output. However, in many industries, that may not be the case, especially in the wire and cable industries. In the wire and cable industries, typically you will see that most of the inventory is stored in the form of raw materials because it's a make to order scenario and highly customized product in certain areas like the rubber cables or the mining cables, which are not made to stock. But there are customers or there are companies or organizations who work purely on a made to stock basis, who make only standard cables, let's say the BS5467, 6724, the standard IECs and the BSEN 50525 wiring type of cables. Now, within these organizations, there is a very high possibility that you have sub-assemblies created which are made as decoupling points, so they can be finished to customers' requirements depending upon the final specifications that the customer requires in terms of the colors and other things. And therefore, it enables the businesses to respond quickly to the changing market requirements and also delivering them to the cables as per the length that is required. Now we talk about the buffer profiles. Now, the second important component of the DDMRP is the buffer profiles. Now, the buffer profiles maybe seem to be similar to look like an safety stock, reorder point, and maximum inventory, but please be aware, this is not the case at all. Buffer profiles are enabling the businesses to operate within a level of confidence, which means that if there is a sudden demand or there is a sudden lack of demand, the buffer zones are automatically adjusted within the system so that it enables to absorb any kind of the impact that is coming because of this surge in demand or slack in demand. So these buffer zones automatically adjust themselves. Typically in the DDMRP, you'll have these three zones that is being seen there, the red, yellow, and the green zones. Now, the green zone basically defines a type of the order frequency and the size, whereas the yellow zone is typically talking about the primary coverage that you need to do within the decoupled lead times. And the red zone is basically talking about the safety. When I say safety, it's not the safety stock. It's completely different. Here, it's when the buffers go, when your actual inventory goes into the buffer zone, it only gives you an alarm signal. It doesn't tell you to stop. Your inventory is not tied up. Your inventory is not blocked. It allows you to use any amount of inventory you want, but it's only giving you a signal that you need to act on it. So the whole point of buffer profiles and buffer levels in the DDMRP is similar to that of a Kanban, where it gives you visual signals to the planners that when I'm in the green zone, I'm okay. When I'm in the yellow zone, I know that it might shift into a red zone. And if I'm in the red zone, that's on the top of my work in the morning. Now, the third component that is there in the DDMRP is the dynamic adjustments. So you have your lead times, you have your average consumptions, you have all your historical data behind it that is there for you to start moving into creating the buffer zones. But let's say in a typical wire and cable industry that's happening across, let's say we are talking about a festive season where we particularly know there is going to be a sudden increase in the demand of the wiring cables or the flexible wires. So, and that is relatively for a short period of time. So instead of changing all the data from your system or anticipating based on the forecast or getting the demand from the sales, you can adjust the factors that are available within the DDMRP, demand-driven planning, which adjust these demands, which is a demand-based adjustment factor, a zone adjustment factor, and a lead time adjustment factor, so that it does not impact the overall the lead times. But at the same time, you can put a validity timelines for each of these demand adjustments. So you have a demand adjustments to take care of the fluctuating demand. You have a zone adjustment factor if you find that there's going to be a supply disruptions, and you can also take into consideration the lead time adjustment factor. Now, one of an example of the lead time adjustment factor is, let's say one of the suppliers who's supplying to you the polymer has suddenly said that he's got a breakdown of his machines and his delays deliveries are going to be delayed by 2 to 3 weeks. So the system can quickly assess the impact of it, but just putting a lead time adjustment factor rather than going into a system and changing the lead time of the material itself, because that change in lead time can impact several other business processes. So the lead time adjustment factor enables to mitigate that risk that is going to come in for a very short and a temporary period of time. Once you have the buffer profiles and you have the demand adjustments put in place, the next step is the next component of the demand-driven planning is the net flow position. The net flow position effectively tells you based upon your stock in hand, your incoming orders within the decoupled lead time, and your demand signals, where do you stand? So typically, you would be required to stay within the yellow-green line. That's where the indicators to you are. So the solution effectively tells you that by looking at just at the table that yes, these are all the indicators which is in the yellow or the green. So therefore, everything seems to be okay. And then if it is going into the red or if it is tending towards to go to the red, you can start taking immediate corrective actions based upon the requirements of the particular materials in place. Right. Moving forward, the next step is the planning and the execution. So we have done the planning of the inventory, and the next step is the actual execution. So you have planned for the raw materials or the sub-assemblies, everything is done, everything is put into motion, everything is working fine. Then there is an element of execution that happens. Now, during this element of executions, there could be disturbances within the manufacturing itself. Breakdowns of machineries, remakes, reworks, or anything that can happen. And these remakes and reworks and breakdowns can cause additional requirements of material. So in the visible and the collaborative execution spectrum, there is a feedback mechanism that goes from the execution model into the planning model through synchronization alerts. That is a metal synchronization alert. There are different types of other alerts that are giving in the system, on-hand alerts, buffer status alerts, signal alerts are given to the system, which then automatically tries to recorrect itself based upon the incoming orders or the demand signals and gives a signal to the material planners to start taking corrective actions or to order extra materials or to scale down the requirements of the materials from the suppliers areas. What are the benefits of demand-driven MRP? As we discussed before, DDMRP essentially focuses on placing buffer stocks. So when these buffer stocks are kept in place, it takes into consideration pull system rather than a push systems. So that makes it every element of the demand-driven process is enabled by the demand signal that comes from the customers, rather than taking into consideration the forecasted data and historical data. It's completely agile to respond to the market requirements because any changes that are happening, which is coming from the customer signals or the supplier signals, get immediately reflected into the DDMRP process, and it gives the planners an alert, synchronization alerts that tells you that this is where you need to take an appropriate action. It gives you proper visibility in your inventory levels and your priorities. Therefore, you don't have to go through tons and tons of spreadsheets. You can, based upon the alerts that has been given to you, you need to first focus on the red ones and then go to the yellow ones. Anything that is in green need not be touched and it can be left across. So the planners are guided to a systematic approach and tells them what are the priorities to be done and what action needs to be taken on those priorities. Now, how can one leverage the benefits of this demand-driven planning? And this is where Hype's Software Studios Cable S4 IBS solution can enable businesses to leverage upon this process. And what do we do here? We enhance the traditional MRP process with an advanced features of dynamic calculations and address the specific needs of the wire and cable industry. So what we're doing here is basically we are offering two types of solutions. We offer the traditional MRP, but not the exact traditional MRP, the static traditional MRP, but it's more enhanced with dynamic features into it. And we also offer the demand-driven MRP solutions. They can be used either of them or as a combination of both. And why it is used to be used in a combination or why either of them can be used, we'll come to it in a while. So what is FlexiFlow? FlexiFlow is basically the brand of Hype's demand-driven solution. Now, once you have a demand-driven MRP solution that is customized from your end or generated from your end, all of these demand-driven solutions have to be certified by Demand-Driven Institute. Only once it is certified by the Demand-Driven Institute, you're allowed to start selling these solutions for the customers. So as Hype Software Studios, our solution has been certified by Demand Driven Institute, which is branded as FlexiFlow. And this FlexiFlow is made and customized towards the requirements of the wire and cable industries. Right. So what are the enhanced functionalities that we provide? To start with, we start with the inventory analysis and segmentations. So which is extremely important, whether it's a traditional MRP or you're talking about a demand-driven MRP. These are some of the most important aspects of inventory analysis and segmentation. So we offer ABC, XYZ, and FSN analysis. And if you can see in the screen on the left, you can see that the ABC and the XYZ analysis have been classified on a 3x3 matrix, which tells you what kind of product or where your products are going to lie across. So mapping your count of items from the analysis on the table into each of these 9 categories, this will enable businesses to plan the right business material requirement approach for each of this group of materials. Probably for a high value, low variability, you can go for a DDMRP, or for a high value, low demand, you could go for a traditional MRP. So businesses can decide depending upon the needs and the analysis of this ABC XYZ analysis, what strategy they need to adopt. Additionally, there is a safety stock calculations. What do we offer in the safety stock calculations is not just a static one, but it's dynamic safety stock calculations. It's just not one calculation, but there are 6 different models of calculations: subjective, maximum minus average methods, the normal distribution methods of 4 types. So all of these models are available, and these could be applied to either one set of materials, a group of materials like polymers and non-metals or tapes or some other kind of groups of materials, or you could apply it at each item level. So for example, you could have normal distribution with uncertainty of demand for the copper, and something with the uncertainty of lead times for aluminum, and so on and so forth. So different materials can have different strategies, and this is completely configurable in the hands of the user. Once your safety stock strategy has been defined, then I believe calculations of reorder point and the safety stock is it's a normal process. Net stock position is nothing but your order on hand, your stock on hand plus what is an order minus your demand in the system, which is a net stock position. Now, this net stock position can be cycled over a period of subsequent 3 months or 6 months or even 9 months into the future to see where you are going low in your stocks, where do you need to take a corrective action, when do you require the materials. So accordingly, you can start triggering your purchase or supply order generation at the time when when the material needs to be available. So it gives you a very high and a long visibility. But one of the challenges here is that this particular, although it is enhanced and it's more dynamic in nature, it does not give you the customer signals. The customer signals are absent yet. We're still working on a historical data, but with an enhanced level. So what's the difference then between the traditional MRP and the demand-driven MRP? We'll consider the differences based upon 4 aspects: the planning time frame, the primary driver, the dependencies, and the ideal environment. Now, ideal environment is one of the most easiest to identify. A traditional MRP will work extremely well when there is a predictable demand and a consistent lead times, which is completely unlike in the current VUCA world, where it's a volatile market and completely unreliable supply chains and changing customer tolerances, which are becoming very, very low. So there has to be balance between the 2 of them. On the planning time frame, the traditional MRP works on forecast, where the FlexiFlow or the demand-driven MRP works on a real-time inventory status and works on the customer signals. What is coming in? What is the actual demand that is coming in from the customer? The primary driver in a traditional MRP is forecast, which is heavily translated into a SNOP, whereas the demand-driven planning is more pull-based and it's using the real-time information of the sales. Now, when I say real-time information of the sales, you're talking about the real orders, not the expected orders, not the anticipated orders, not the planned orders, not the forecasted orders, but the real orders into the system. Now, this can be quite tricky in some of the business cases. We have been talking to some of the customers on the same process, and incidentally, he had a very unique scenario where the lead time of manufacturing was less than the lead time of the raw materials itself, because many of the raw materials were imported. This is a very typical scenario where the order book was very low. So the customer was unable to see the customer signals, but at the same time, he had to maintain certain level of stock because all these materials are imported and they have a very long lead time. And therefore, if the order comes in, he will not be able to respond to the customer requirements. So a very typical kind of scenario that came across. And we were able to guide them to start using the plan adjustment factors, which would help them to navigate through these disruptions. So this is how we can help our businesses to continue with the whatever scenarios they have, but at the same time adapt to the changing requirements of the businesses. All right, moving forward, what are the benefits of the Cable S4 IBS Solutions? So IBS stands for Integrated Business Solutions, and it helps the businesses by cost saving, which is number one. That means your inventory levels are optimized, and therefore your working capital costs are reduced, and therefore your tied up money is used into business that is more useful, and therefore return on investment is higher. You have a better control on your inventory. You know exactly how much material is required, when it is required, and how you need to start the supply order generation process. There's a real-time visibility. So every day you come into your office and the MRP planner opens up the DDMRP system. The system is automatically recalculating based upon until yesterday night's data and giving you what is the current scenario of the various raw materials that you have in the system. So there is nothing to be done. Everything is fully automated. And thereby, this enables you to start customizing your planning model. How you can start working using your demand-driven MRP in combination for the traditional MRP for the raw materials. An example which was posed to us from one of the potential customers is that we've got a huge amount of raw materials, right from metals to polymers to tapes, which includes ABC classification, and they've been doing the ABC classification for many years. How do we identify what items should be included in the demand-driven planning or what should be considered in the traditional MRP? Of course, there are a lot of small value items which we do not want to start putting into the DDMRP because DDMRP requires careful consideration and daily follow-up for these particular materials there. So therefore, this company then we had proposed to this company that some of the C-class materials, which is not very significant, can work on a reorder point principle, while some of the very critical materials, which are volatile, high value items, volatile, having a long lead time to be pushed into the demand-driven planning. So by adopting this approach, a two-pronged approach, where you have some critical materials going into the demand-driven planning and the other materials going into the traditional MRP, the enhanced traditional MRP, the businesses also able to manage the inventory by giving attention to which products they need to focus on. So the focus is mainly on the DDMRP products. Let's say a list of around 15 to 20 items where the company had to focus and the planner has to first take a decision on these items. For all the rest of the items which falls under the C class or the engineering spares and the consumables, there was a one-time look into it once in a month or as a periodic inventory kind of a planning systems. As I said before, it's very important to understand what is decoupling. And I said it's a strategic approach that mitigates the variability in the supply and demand. And typically you can see here the decoupling inventory, where it has been kept and how it has been kept here. And there are distortions that come within the system, and there are distortions that go out of the systems and that come in. Now, what are these distortions? We'll come to that. In the meanwhile, this is how the dashboard of the DDMRP solution that Pipe Studio has developed looks like. So you have your materials. It talks to you about your average daily consumption. It shows you all your red, yellow, blue charts out here. And it also helps you to calculate all your zones information. What is the amount of material to be required in your red zone, the yellow zone, or the green zone? Here, we're only talking about those zones as a buffer profile. It is not the actual stock that you keep. It's completely different. These are all the areas that shows you in which location you are or in which zone you are that enables you to take a decision. Once you have the basic parameters input into the system takes over and does complete automation of your entire material requirement planning processes. Moving on from the decoupling to the distortions that come in is the bullwhip effect. Now, what is a bullwhip effect in effect? The bullwhip effect is essentially something that distorts your entire information within the supply chain. A small trigger in the demand can create a big impact onto your processes in your subsequent process. For example, let's take a scenario where a retailer in the wire and cable industry who has been selling your wires in the market comes back and tells to your distributor that there is a new product in the market. I mean, there is an expected increase in the market by about 5 to 6% over the next 3 months. Now, the distributor knows that if he doesn't have the stock, he's not going to be able to sell much. So he goes and informs the wholesaler that there's going to be an anticipated demand of 10%. So that he keeps the buffer for himself to make sure that he's able to sell the products and make enough money out of it. In return, the distributor goes to the wholesaler and tells it's a 15% increase. The wholesaler goes back and tells the manufacturer that there's going to be a 20% increase. So what has happened? A 5% expected surge in the demand has been bullwhipped into an effect of around 20% by the time it reaches into the manufacturing. This is a bullwhip effect. And what happens? The manufacturer will start creating stock orders. All the bending wires are manufactured, packaged, and kept ready. And suddenly the demand is only 5%. And you have endless stock sitting in your yard. Deterioration, working capital blocked. So this bullwhip effect is completely neutralized by using the decoupling inventory, understanding where your strategic inventory has to be positioned, and thereby eliminate these kind of inventories. One example for this is again with one of our customers who have been actively working with us, manufacturing building wires. Now, this manufacturer has got building wires which are manufactured in multicolors and in different packaging. 50 feet, 100 feet, 70, 100 yards, 90 yards, 100 meters, 500 meters, different types of packaging. Until the time we spoke to them, they were having stock profiles created for each type and each size of colors, and they used to have tons and tons of packaged wires lying in their yard. Some of them are not been moving for quite many few months because the demand was not there. So we shifted the entire process from those packaged products into a decoupling point where we just keep the insulated wires in stock. So as the demand signals comes in, so that created the decoupling inventory for them. So you keep, let's say 1 drums, 2 drums of each color of each size in the inventory. So as and when the demand comes in, you package it according to the demand, and the consumption of the material shows that there is a reduction in the quantity, and subsequently production orders get raised into the system. And when the customer started doing this, his inventory was cleared, his yard was clean, and his working capital was released. So this is how the decoupling can help in the manufacturing of wire and cables in the smallest possible way. Because much of the customers in the wire and cable industries are make to order. In make to order, you do not keep a stock of either the sub-assemblies or any kind of finished goods. You generally tend to keep the stock right at the upstream processes, which is in the form of raw materials. Okay, so how does bullwhip affect mitigation? What are the causes of it? The causes are delayed communications, amplified communications, conflicting signals within the systems, and cumulative lead times exceeding customer tolerances. There's an information distortion and there is a material distortions. The information coming in from the retailer up to the manufacturer is a type of information distortion. And in the anticipation that the demand is going to increase by 20%, the manufacturer is ramping up the production of his products, increasing the stock of raw materials. So not only does he got the finished products, he's also increased the stock of raw materials. So it's a double effect there. And how do we mitigate this bullwhip effect? Is exactly through demand-driven planning. So step 1, decoupling. Step 2, buffering. Real-time demand signals, that's the net flow position planning, and then reducing the dependencies on the system. Before we summarize the whole process and the presentation in the webinar, there are certain warning signals that tells an organization that you need to change your MRP process. In my opinion, there are three. One, an inventory graveyard starts developing within your organization. Huge piles of inventory, whether it is in the raw material form, whether it is sub-assemblies, or is it is finished products. The second signal is that you start having frequent firefighting and fire drills within the organization. Sales and planning, planning and manufacturing, manufacturing and sales, and there is a chaos in the company. That's the second signal. And the third signal is bullwhip earthquakes. Now, just like an analogy of an earthquake, you can have a massive earthquake that can cause a huge destruction to structures and facilities of a town. And there could be minor earthquakes also, which can rattle the foundations, but may not actually destroy the structure. Now, if I try to compare that analogy to that of a bullwhip effect, it's exactly is the same. You can see that a 5% increase, anticipated increase from the retailer has bullwhipped into a 20% increase at the manufacturer's end. So that's a massive increase there. So that has completely rattled up the organization's working capital in a manner that they might even not be profitable for a certain period of time, where companies are working under tight working capital scenarios. On the contrary, there could also be scenarios where we have small bullwhip effects that are coming in different times, at different places, at different types of products that are coming through. And all of these starts accumulating over a period of time, okay, and start causing an effect that is going to impact your working capital. So these are the three major warning signals that tells you that you need to revisit your material requirement planning and think about moving from the old historical static material requirement planning into a more dynamic material requirement planning, or move into the demand-driven material requirement planning. Okay, so to summarize here, the key in the demand planning is prioritizing. And that is the first and foremost step, without which a DDMRP process cannot be successful. The second difference between the DDMRP and the traditional MRP is that the demand-driven MRP focuses on the pull from the customer. So it's customer signals that are triggering the entire chain of process. Customer signals, the demand signals, are creating the effect inside the business process. It creates the inventory movements, it creates the buffer profiles, it leads to the generation of a supply order generation. The supply order generation gets back into the system, then the operation starts moving forward, and the customer dates and the customer orders are fulfilled. Thirdly, the demand-driven material requirement planning is suitable to be applied to the entire organization portfolio, or it can be applied to a part portfolio. It can be applied to raw materials. It can be applied to finished goods. It can be applied anywhere within the organization, as long as we understand what is the strategic positioning and how to buffer them. Okay. Now, Cable S4 IBS Solutions, that the solutions that Hype Studio offers, is enabled with all of these functionalities, and it operates as a plug-and-play solution. So you don't have to buy additional software, you don't have to integrate with additional software. So once you have the DDMRP solution from Cable S4 IBS, it's just a plug-and-play. It works with any solutions, no additional software integrations are required, and you achieve your results that is required. Right, so that's the end of the my presentation. I'll have the session open to the audience. If you have any questions, any doubts, any clarifications, please feel free to ask us these questions. Thank you very much for all your time and attention. And if you do need to have a consultation in detail with us on the DDMRP, as a Hype Software Studio, we are offering a free 1-hour consultation that can help you to understand what are the challenges in your current inventory management system and how DDMRP can help you. So if you need our consultation, you can book our session, reach out to us on our website, or you can contact any of your team. We are here to help you and support you if you need it. Thank you very much
Thank you for watching. If you found this session valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insights on digital transformation in manufacturing. See you in the next webinar.